the unbelievable number of fentanyl overdose deaths that we're seeing, not just in West Virginia, but around the country. In the last 12 months, something like 100,000 Americans have died from fentanyl overdoses. Now, the reason that's a big story is because that fentanyl is coming from China, and China knows that it's pumping it in here. It knows that it's killing American citizens. If China was killing 100,000 Americans a year with their military, we'd be at nuclear levels of war right now. But because they are just pumping poison across our southern border and using that to kill people in the United States, we pretend that it's not an act of war. I would submit that it is an act of war, and that this should be a real deal breaker when it comes to doing business with China.
My name is James Miller, and I'm the director of the Community Corrections Program for Raleigh County, West Virginia. I began this position in 2015. Prior to that, I was law enforcement for 20 years. Starting in 1993, this community had one illicit substance, and that was crack cocaine. Very rarely did we ever see methamphetamine or heroin. And in 2015, when I began this job, we were seeing nothing but heroin. And it's gotten to the point, very rapidly things have changed. Heroin and prescription medication was what we were finding predominantly in all of our drug screens up until about 2018. And the rapid change to methamphetamine, it was like overnight. And I've spoken with investigators in a drug unit to find out why that change took effect so fast. It was because it's economics. The Mexican drug cartel is the predominant supplier of illegal drugs to North America, and it's cheaper and easier to produce methamphetamine than it is heroin. So now we're into a transition from even methamphetamine to fentanyl, because it is, again, easier to produce, because the only thing you have to do is import it. We're comparing that with methamphetamine. You import all of the precursor ingredients, and you have to actually manufacture that drug. But fentanyl can be imported, that comes from Asia, predominantly China, and that can be mixed in with any other drug to increase its potency and its likelihood of addiction for the user, or it can be sold simply by itself, and it's very highly sought after as a standalone drug. Cocaine and methamphetamine fall in the family of central nervous system stimulants. They're uppers. Heroin, the drugs like OxyContin, hydrocodone, those opiate-based medications are central nervous system depressants. And heroin is one of the larger, more predominantly abused drugs in that class, and fentanyl is the most powerful painkiller on the market. And it has the same effects. The physiological effects are slowed heart rate, slowed rate of breathing, and more of a lethargic euphoria. It's not and that's why methamphetamine users are called tweakers, because they're tweaking, they're on edge all the time. But fentanyl is the most powerful painkiller that's on the market today, and it has a very, very hard effect on the user as far as the slowing of breathing and heart rate. Well, OxyContin was a very powerful drug, but fentanyl is even more potent. It's 100 times more potent than morphine, and it's highly, highly addictive and extremely dangerous to the person who is using that drug. And the only time I heard of fentanyl prior to what we're seeing today in the illicit consumption of fentanyl were fentanyl patches that were readily prescribed for someone who is in the end stages of cancer. Pain is excruciating. Patches can be applied to the skin, and it is a transdermal, slow-release medication. And we had, as a police officer, I had worked cases before where people had died from overdose because they had taken a fentanyl patch, turned it inside out, and chewed on it, trying to get that high. And to keep, most of the time it's to keep from getting dope sick, as it's called, more than it is to get high. But it was killing people probably 15 years ago, but so nothing like today.
How is what's the numbers look like now as far as?
Nationwide, last year, the overdose death rate increased about 38%. But the death rate attributed directly to fentanyl increased 58%. So nationwide, it's a huge problem. Here in this community, it is a huge problem. And I don't know how we combat this problem, but the literature that I've read indicates that anyone who is addicted to heroin, upon trying fentanyl for the first time, they want nothing but fentanyl from that point forward, because it is the most intense high that they've gotten. And as I understand things more and more and more, the continued use of heroin, there are two reasons why, or three reasons why. One, the body becomes dependent upon that chemical. Secondly, is the fact that the user is, once that first high occurs, nothing after that compares. It's the peak is the first time they try it, and the effect diminishes. That's why users go from, when the pain pill epidemic was, it was commonly called eating pills, swallowing the pills, they get high. Then it transitioned into crushing them and snorting them because it was a more direct delivery system. And that's how the needle comes into play. It's not because people want to end up injecting, but it's the most economical way of doing it. What a pill that you would eat before might have been $50, and then it gets to the point where it takes 2 or 3, and then you get to the needle. Well, with fentanyl, that person chasing that heroin high gets the fentanyl high. And once again, you're at a pinnacle where nothing else compares.
What's the cost?
It is, if I'm not mistaken, about $10, $15 per stamp, which is a small dose. The gram-wise, I'm not sure. I have not worked on that side of things. And those are questions that you can get varied answers to, because some people will discount theirs in order to build a better customer base, just like anything else out here in the free market society. Recently, Raleigh County experienced an episode of overdoses in a particular community where 6 individuals overdosed, and of those 6, 2 passed away from the effects of fentanyl prior to EMS even being able to get to them to administer Narcan or other life-saving practices. And it still is hard for me to wrap my mind around this. I'm not a clinician, but I have to beg myself the question, was that person or those 2 individuals intolerant to the fentanyl, or was it at such a high dose that it even overrode their tolerance to the opiates that they'd been consuming? But obviously they did.
Even know they were taking.
Correct. Obviously they did not do it intentionally. And it was a group of friends who had went to a particular place, purchased heroin, and either did not know fentanyl was present or knew it was present, but not at what level. And it almost killed all 6 of them.
Wow, unbelievable. So what kind of overdose numbers are we seeing in West Virginia now?
The numbers fluctuate, and I honestly don't know the numbers. I used to track those as far as grant writing purposes. And it's not only is it difficult, but it takes away from the individual. If I were to think more widely of the numbers in West Virginia or even in Raleigh County as a whole, and think about that volume, it gives me less focus than on the individual and the small community that we have. And so what I steer our team toward is the population we have with us right now. We can't cure the world. Almost every case of substance use disorder also includes a mental health disorder. It's called co-occurring disorders. One of the worst places for someone with a mental health disorder to be is in a jail or a prison. They're untreated and they're being victimized even further by the other inmates and by the institutionalization without care. So we have begun a program where we do go to the jails, interview and identify individuals that we can get out of the jails to serve them through the delivery of substance use therapies and mental health therapies. And that's when we really have started seeing an increase. There's no knowing how many people in the prison system have mental health disorders, but it's significantly high, and I would gather probably 80 to 90%. So with that in mind, you look at the community then and you see people who are out on the streets and obviously using and understand the gravity of the situation. We bring in people from all different avenues, circuit court, magistrate court, through the Department of Health and Human Resources, and through our efforts with the Regional Jail Authority, and the numbers just keep growing. I would like to start a thought that this is not so much as a fentanyl issue or a heroin issue or a methamphetamine issue. This is an addiction issue. Addiction is, in my personal opinion and in some of the literature I've read, that is more attributable to mental health than just about anything else. The types of trauma that our clients have experienced as children or young adults, especially young females when they're in their teens, depression, bipolar disorder, the types of things that people of the Christian Broadcasting Network's audience could look for is increasing awareness of mental health in their communities, understanding that having a mental health disorder does not make someone less of a human being by any means. But if the communities across the nation work more toward addressing mental health disorders, we will have less addiction issues, and we will have less violence, because the mental health drives a lot of the violence issues in the nation.
Yeah,
If our enemies can destroy our youth who fight our wars, then they've already won the battle.